The planet Xylos Prime hummed with a clinical efficiency. Towering chrome structures pierced the swirling, ammonia-rich atmosphere, connected by networks of shimmering energy conduits. Every action, every movement, was governed by the grand algorithmic codex, a set of rules so comprehensive, so meticulously detailed, that spontaneity was practically a crime. Here, amidst the gleaming order of Xylos Prime, resided Dave. Just Dave, a human. Dave wasn't particularly remarkable. He wasn't a genius, a hero, or even all that ambitious. He was, in most respects, perfectly average. He'd landed this gig, liaison officer to the Xylosian High Council, through a series of bureaucratic mishaps and a surprising aptitude for sleeping through interstellar hyperspace jumps. The Xylosians, on the other hand, were anything but average. They were a silicon-based life form, resembling towering stacks of geometrically perfect crystals. Their society was a marvel of logic and precision. Emotions were considered a dangerous anomaly. Artistic expression a waste of resources, and humor. Well, humor was a concept they simply couldn't process. Their days consisted of meticulously executing their designated tasks, their thoughts, and actions dictated by the grand algorithmic codex. Every Xylosian knew their place, their purpose, and the precise number of nanoseconds allocated to each activity. Dave, with his penchant for Hawaiian shirts, his tendency to leave half-eaten sandwiches lying around, and his baffling habit of whistling off-key, was a constant source of bewilderment and thinly veiled disapproval. He didn't understand the codex, didn't try to, and frankly didn't seem to care. He addressed the High Council, a collective of the 7 most geometrically perfect Xylosians, with a casual, "Hey guys," and often interrupted their pronouncements with questions like, "So is this gonna take long? 'Cause I'm kinda missing my stories on the interwebs." The Xylosians, of course, had protocols for dealing with anomalies. Countless flowcharts and contingency plans outlined the proper response to any deviation from the codex. But Dave was an entirely new category of anomaly. He wasn't hostile, wasn't incompetent, wasn't even particularly disruptive, not intentionally anyway. He just existed, a splash of chaotic color in their otherwise perfectly calibrated world. They had initially tried to correct his behavior. Countless meetings were held, lengthy lectures delivered, and detailed manuals provided, all outlining the proper way for a liaison officer to conduct himself on Xylos Prime. Dave, to his credit, listened politely. He even nodded occasionally. But then, he'd go right back to wearing his Hawaiian shirts, whistling off-key and asking if he could get anything delivered to the council chambers. The Xylosians found themselves increasingly frustrated. Their logic, their protocols, their entire worldview was being challenged by this one, unassuming human. He was an enigma wrapped in a riddle, slathered in barbecue sauce, and served with a side of utter indifference. And as they would soon discover, he was about to turn their perfectly ordered world completely upside down. The first incident involved the designated hydration receptacle. The Xylosians, being silicon-based, didn't require water in the traditional sense. Instead, they absorbed a carefully calibrated blend of mineral-rich coolant through specialized pores. This coolant was dispensed from a sleek chrome dispenser, programmed to deliver precisely 3.7 milliliters every 4.2 cycles. Dave, upon discovering this, decided it looked suspiciously like an Earth-style water cooler. So naturally, he filled it with grape soda. The consequences were significant. The High Council, mid-deliberation on optimal energy allocation, were suddenly coated in a sticky, purple fluid. Their crystalline structures began to fizz. The grand algorithmic codex made no mention of dealing with carbonated beverages. It was, by Xylosian standards, a full-blown crisis. Dave, witnessing the chaos, simply shrugged. "Hey, I thought you guys might like a little flavor. Grape's a classic." He offered a can of lemon-lime soda as a peace offering, further compounding the issue. Then there was the incident of the bioluminescent moss. The Xylosians cultivated patches of this moss in their living quarters, The subtle pulsating glow was designed to promote a state of calm and focused contemplation, optimizing cognitive function during rest cycles. Dave, however, found it a bit dull. So, using a combination of glow sticks, glitter glue, and a modified Xylosian sonic emitter, he transformed his moss patch into a miniature disco. The pulsating glow became a strobe. The calm contemplation became an involuntary urge to dance. His neighbors, usually paragons of stoic efficiency, were soon found inexplicably bopping their crystalline structures to the rhythm of, well, whatever bizarre music Dave was streaming from his interwebs device. The Xylosians convened an emergency session of the High Council. Flowcharts were consulted. Algorithms were crunched. The conclusion was unavoidable. Dave was disrupting the very fabric of Xylosian society. But his infractions were so bizarre, so lacking in any discernible malice or logical purpose. They were difficult to categorize, difficult to punish. The codex simply wasn't equipped to handle a human who thought grape soda was an appropriate beverage for silicon-based life forms, or that bioluminescent moss would benefit from a liberal application of glitter. The frustration was palpable. You could practically see the Xylosians' crystalline structures grinding against each other in silent, silicon-based exasperation. Dave, meanwhile, remained blissfully oblivious. He continued to wear his Hawaiian shirts, whistle off-key, and generally exist in a state of cheerful, chaotic indifference to the meticulously ordered world around him. He was a walking, talking, soda-fizzing glitter bomb of cultural insensitivity, and the Xylosians were starting to realize they were completely out of their depth. Boredom, it seemed, was Dave's primary motivator. His official job title, Intergalactic Liaison Officer, was, in reality, 99% waiting for something to happen. So to alleviate the tedium, Dave began to improve things. And by improve, he meant subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, altering Xylosian technology to better suit his Earth-centric sensibilities. His first major project involved the sonic sanitation unit. This device, used to sterilize everything, from food preparation surfaces to living quarters, emitted a high-frequency pulse that disintegrated microscopic organisms. The Xylosians valued hygiene above all else. Their sterile environment was a point of cultural pride. Dave, however, found the constant hum of the sanitation unit irritating. So he tinkered. He rewired the frequency modulator, replaced the sterile hum with a series of jaunty MIDI tunes he'd downloaded from some obscure corner of the internet. Now, instead of silently vaporizing bacteria, the sanitation unit serenaded them with polka music. The effect was unforeseen. The Xylosians, accustomed to absolute silence during sanitation cycles, were thrown into disarray. Surgical procedures were interrupted by unexpected bursts of accordion music. Important strategic planning sessions were punctuated by the cheerful sounds of a synthesized tuba. The bacteria, presumably, were just as confused. Then there was the matter of the nutrient paste dispensers. The Xylosians, in the interest of efficiency, subsisted on a flavorless, nutrient-rich paste dispensed directly into their oral apertures. It was nutritionally complete, perfectly balanced, and utterly devoid of any sensory pleasure. Dave found it appalling. His solution? He replaced the paste with a variety of earth-based condiments. One day, Xylosian workers were surprised to receive a squirt of ketchup. The next, it was mustard. Then came relish, mayonnaise, and, on one particularly unfortunate occasion, a generous dollop of horseradish. These Xylosian digestive systems, designed for bland paste, reacted poorly to the sudden influx of spices and preservatives. Crystalline stomachs churned, silent burps echoed through the sterile corridors. The High Council, meeting to discuss the escalating condiment crisis, declared a state of emergency. "He's weaponizing flavor!" shrieked one particularly agitated council member, his crystalline structure vibrating with indignation. This horseradish is an act of aggression," Dave, when questioned, simply shrugged. "Hey, variety is the spice of life, right? I figured you guys could use a little kick." He offered them a selection of hot sauces as a peace offering, further exacerbating the situation. But perhaps The most egregious of Dave's improvements involved the sentient surveillance orbs. These orbs, hovering silently throughout Xylosian society, monitored everything. Every conversation, every movement, every flicker of crystalline emotion was recorded and analyzed, ensuring absolute adherence to Xylosian law and custom. They were the all-seeing eyes of the collective, the silent guardians of order and efficiency. Dave found them creepy, so he gave them googly eyes. Yes, that's right. Using a combination of sticky tape and a large bag of novelty googly eyes he'd ordered online, Dave transformed the sentient surveillance orbs into a fleet of wobbly-eyed, eternally surprised observers. The effect was transformative. The Xylosians, accustomed to being watched by emotionless orbs of silent judgment, were now confronted with the unsettling sight of hundreds of googly eyes staring back at them. Important pronouncements were met with a chorus of silent, wide-eyed stares. Criminals burst into uncontrollable laughter mid-confession. The very concept of Xylosian authority began to crumble under the weight of so much absurdity. The High Council, in a state of near-total panic, convened an emergency session. Flowcharts were abandoned. Algorithms were discarded. The codex was thrown out the window. The Xylosians were faced with a horrifying realization. Dave wasn't just disrupting their society, he was turning it into a cosmic joke. The initial amusement the Xylosians felt towards Dave's eccentricities began to curdle into suspicion. What had started as minor cultural faux pas now seemed like calculated acts of disruption. The Polka-playing sanitation units, the condiment-laced nutrient paste, and the googly-eyed surveillance orbs were no longer amusing anomalies, but rather evidence of something far more sinister. High Counselor Zorgon 7, a particularly rigid and humorless Xylosian, was the first to voice the growing paranoia. This Dave, his actions are illogical. He claims to be improving our technology, but he only introduces chaos and inefficiency. It is unnatural. Zorgon 7's crystalline mandible clicked with increasing agitation as he spoke. Other council members echoed his concerns. Algorithms were run, data streams were analyzed, and complex flowcharts were constructed, all in an attempt to decipher Dave's motives. But the more they investigated, the more confused they became. Dave's behavior defied all logical explanation. It was a variable they couldn't compute. Perhaps, suggested Xylar 4, a junior council member, he is a saboteur sent by a rival species to destabilize our society? The idea, once voiced, spread like a virus through the council chambers. The Xylosians, a species built on order and control, found the idea of external manipulation deeply unsettling. The googly-eyed surveillance orbs only amplified their paranoia. Every glance, every gesture, every seemingly innocuous act was now viewed through a lens of suspicion. The Xylosians found themselves questioning each other, their trust eroding under the constant, unwavering gaze of Dave's ridiculous modifications. Even the simple act of consuming nutrient paste became an exercise in anxiety. Was that ketchup, or some kind of mind-altering substance? Were the Polka tunes subliminal messages designed to weaken their resolve? The Xylosian society, once a paragon of sterile efficiency, was teetering on the brink of utter chaos. "We must," declared Zorgon 7, his crystalline structure glowing with ominous intensity, "uncover the truth. We must determine the extent of Dave's treachery, and we must neutralize the threat." The council, united in their fear and suspicion, voted unanimously to initiate a full-scale investigation into Dave's activities. A team of Xylosian investigators, equipped with advanced scanning devices and logic probes, descended upon Dave's living quarters. They meticulously cataloged every item, analyzed every surface, and scrutinized every digital file, searching for evidence of sabotage, espionage, or any other form of interstellar malfeasance. They found a collection of vintage Earth comic books, a half-eaten bag of cheese puffs, and a rubber chicken. The investigators, baffled by the utter lack of incriminating evidence, were forced to conclude that Dave was either a master of deception or, simply, incomprehensible, but the damage was done. The seeds of suspicion had been sown, and the Xylosian society was rapidly descending into a state of collective paranoia. Accusations flew, conspiracies were imagined, and the once orderly Xylosian civilization was on the verge of collapsing under the weight of its own rigid logic. They were missing something, they felt. But what? The Xylosian High Council, their patience worn thinner than a sheet of graphene, convened an emergency session. Holographic projections flickered, and agitated clicks echoed through the chamber as they debated their next course of action. Desperate to restore order, they resolved to deploy their ultimate weapon, a device so powerful it was only brought out in times of absolute crisis. With a solemn ceremony befitting the unveiling of a cosmic artifact, the weapon was brought forth. Carried by 6 specially selected drones, it was presented on a shimmering platform in the center of the council chamber. A hush fell over the room as all eyes focused on the device. It was a pressure cooker. Dave, who had been invited to attend the unveiling, tilted his head, a bemused expression on his face. He squinted at the gleaming metal pot, the safety valve glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "Is that a Presto 8-quart? The Xylosians exchanged confused glances. "Presto?" Zorgan 7 echoed, his voice laced with suspicion. "Is this some kind of code? A declaration of war from a Presto-aligned civilization?" The other council members mumbled in agreement. Dave sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. No, Presto's just the brand. It's a pressure cooker. You use it to cook food faster." He gestured vaguely at the device. "You know, stew, chili, maybe some Xylosian delicacies." Silence descended upon the chamber, broken only by the hum of the life support systems. The Xylosians stared at Dave, their crystalline mandibles agape in disbelief. Their ultimate weapon, the pinnacle of their technological prowess, was a cooking appliance? But its purpose, sputtered Xylar 4, his voice cracking with incredulity. "We were told it could reshape planetary orbits. Disrupt temporal fields," added another council member. Dave chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Yeah, well, it can certainly reshape the orbit of a meatball sub if you're not careful. Look, you put food in here, add some water, seal it up, and the pressure builds up. Cooks things real quick." He tapped the side of the pressure cooker with his finger. "Great for pot roasts." The revelation hung in the air like a bad smell. The Xylosians, a species that had conquered galaxies and mastered advanced physics, had been using a kitchen appliance as their ultimate weapon. The implications were staggering. Their entire understanding of technology and warfare was shattered. Zorgon 7, his crystalline structure dimming with shame, finally spoke. "But the manual, the schematics, they clearly indicated a device of immense destructive power." Dave shrugged. "Maybe you were reading the instructions for the self-cleaning function? Those can get pretty intense." The Xylosians were speechless. Their most prized possession, the symbol of their power and ingenuity, was nothing more than a glorified pot. Their rigid logic circuits struggled to reconcile this reality with their deeply ingrained beliefs. The foundation of their society began to crack. Dave, sensing their confusion, offered a small, sympathetic smile. "Hey, don't feel bad. Happens to the best of us. You know, back on Earth, we used to think the internet was just for cat videos." He paused, then added, "Turns out it mostly is." The silence that followed was deafening. The revelation hit the Xylosian society like a supernova. Their carefully constructed reality, built on logic and the meticulous interpretation of data, crumbled into dust. The pressure cooker, their ultimate weapon, exposed the fragility of their understanding. The implications were catastrophic. News spread like wildfire through the hive cities and across the shimmering oceans. The Xylosians, a species renowned for their unwavering certainty, were now adrift in a sea of doubt. Their leaders, once revered as infallible strategists, were now figures of ridicule and pity. The societal structure that had endured for millennia teetered on the brink of collapse. The High Council, paralyzed by indecision and shame, found itself besieged by a wave of public unrest. The once orderly queues for nutrient paste devolved into chaotic mobs. The drone pilots, unsure of their purpose, began performing synchronized dance routines in the skies. The very fabric of Xylosian civilization was unraveling. Amidst the chaos, a strange phenomenon began to emerge. Xylosians, desperate for guidance, started turning to the source of their undoing, Dave. They gathered outside his quarters, their crystalline bodies trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. They whispered his name, their voices barely audible above the din of societal collapse. Zorgan 7, his face etched with despair, approached Dave, his mandibles twitching nervously. "Human," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Our society, it is broken. We have no purpose, no direction. Our logic has failed us." He paused, swallowing hard. We humbly request your assistance." Dave, who had been enjoying a quiet afternoon of solitaire, looked up in surprise. "My assistance? With what? Making stew?" He chuckled, but Zorgon 7 remained impassive. "No, human. We ask you to lead us, to guide us through this crisis. Your unconventional wisdom, it is all we have left." Other Xylosians echoed Zorgon 7's plea. "Yes, human. Show us the way. Tell us what to do with the pressure cooker. Save us from our own logic." The crowd surged forward, their crystalline eyes pleading for guidance. Dave stared at the assembled Xylosians, his expression a mixture of amusement and disbelief. He scratched his chin, considering their request. "Lead you, huh? Well, I've never led a galaxy-spanning civilization before, but I guess there's a first time for everything." He grinned, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "All right, you overgrown glow sticks, listen up. We're gonna start with mandatory nap time, followed by a universal potluck. And someone get me a wrench. I think I can hot rod that pressure cooker." The crowd erupted in cheers, their hope rekindled by the most unlikely of saviors. And so Dave, the accidental leader, began his reign. His first act was to declare Bureaucracy Break Tuesdays, a day where all forms were replaced with interpretive dance. Productivity, surprisingly, soared. The Xylosians, freed from the shackles of paperwork, discovered a latent passion for synchronized movement. He then tackled the food situation. Nutrient paste was out. In its place, Dave introduced the concept of flavor. He jury-rigged a food synthesizer to produce pizza, tacos, and something he called a grilled cheese. The Xylosians, initially skeptical, became hopelessly addicted. The great algae farms were repurposed into, well, slightly more interesting algae farms with experimental additions of basil and oregano. The rigid social hierarchy also received a Dave-sized shakeup. He instituted a Compliment Friday, forcing every Xylosian to say something nice to a colleague. The first few weeks were excruciating, filled with awkward pauses and forced pleasantries. But gradually, genuine appreciation bloomed, and the hive cities started feeling a little less hive-like. The military was another story. Dave found their obsession with galactic conquest a tad excessive. His solution? He turned their warships into mobile concert halls. The Xylosian soldiers, initially horrified, discovered a surprising talent for playing the xylophone. Their battle cries were replaced with catchy jingles, and their enemies were thoroughly confused. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some of the older, more conservative Xylosians grumbled about the erosion of tradition. They missed the days of endless paperwork and flavorless paste. But even they couldn't deny the palpable improvement in the overall quality of life. Slowly, the Xylosian society began to transform. They became more creative, more compassionate, and, dare it be said, more fun. They even started telling jokes, albeit terribly logical ones. But Dave didn't mind. He was just happy to see them smile, or at least do whatever the Xylosian equivalent of smiling was. Under Dave's unconventional leadership, the Xylosians learned that sometimes the best way to conquer the universe is with a little bit of humanity. Years later, Xylos wasn't the same planet. The interpretive dance craze had spread to neighboring systems, and intergalactic trade deals were now often negotiated through elaborate synchronized routines. Other species, observing this strange phenomenon, began to send envoys to Earth, seeking the secrets of human leadership. Dave, of course, had long since retired to a beach in Florida, sipping something fruity and utterly unqualified to explain his success. The galaxy, however, was forever changed. They learned that sometimes the most illogical solution is the most effective, and that a little bit of chaos can be a good thing. And it all started with one very unusual human who didn't know the rules and didn't care to learn them.